Good afternoon, welcome to Talking Performance. My name is Marianne Mulvey and I'm Curator of Project Programmes here at Tate Modern. And the title of today's event says something about the fact that to a certain extent both Stephen and Patrick's writing and performances deal with speaking and what it means to do so in public. And after they perform, we're going to have a really short pause, and then we will be talking performance with them. And we want this to be a really open conversation, so I'll field some questions, but I also want your questions, comments, thoughts, links to your own practices, anything you want basically, so just throw it all at us, and we might even have some questions for you to kind of make it a proper conversation. So Talking Performance has itself come out of an extended conversation that my colleague Joseph and I have been having with Stephen and Patrick about their work, through seeing them perform, making studio visits, and through contributions that they've both made or will be making to our course programme here at Tate Modern. We'll say more about that later, I think. Just to say they've also got a long history of collaborating with each other and with other artists, so I think, again, we can talk about that in the discussion. So the format of the afternoon will be, I'll introduce Stephen in a little bit, he'll present some new work, and then I'll introduce Patrick, who will do the same. And then we'll have that short break, and then launch into a conversation. So, before we begin with Stephen, I'll just tell you a bit more about him. Stephen Fowler is a poet, artist, and martial artist. He works across poetry, fiction, sonic art, visual art, installation, and performance. He's published 6 collections of poetry and has been translated into 13 different languages. Stephen has performed his work internationally, and he's a poetry editor of 3am magazine and curator of the Enemies Project, which again we can bring out later. So please join me in welcoming Stephen.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, I think the first thing that I want to do, which perhaps isn't in the normal narrative format of performance, is acknowledge the context, how special this afternoon is to me. I think it's sometimes difficult when you go and attend an event, when you see the remove that someone who's presenting something or performing something, as opposed to someone who's sitting in the audience, have. It's difficult to be in that position, but for me this is a very personal event because, when I first moved to London, just maybe 10 minutes away, I worked in a recruitment consultancy, the very worst job that anyone can imagine, the most soulless, draining, agony. And I would come on my lunchtimes harassed by other people who worked around me on these open plan desks to sit in the shop downstairs and walk through the galleries. So psychically, this is kind of a very special space and incredibly symbolic to me to be here this afternoon with you. And also, of course, I want to acknowledge the context of this event is intimate. There's not hundreds of people. This is something that we can kind of share. So I want to take this opportunity, this little time that I have with all of you, maybe do something a little bit different in the sense that I'm not really trying to achieve an artwork that's special or impress anyone. I'm just really trying to build like a relationship with the people who are here, have kind of a conversation, something that's open, hopefully doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, but at the same time is something that generates an exchange between us. Because there are a lot of people in the room who are my friends and people I really care about and people who are loved ones to me. So that's something I want to acknowledge because often people don't acknowledge that when they're performing. So it is kind of an amazing opportunity with people like Patrick, who is such an old friend, to create this kind of exchange and atmosphere, because then I get to take away something as well. And that's a bit special, something you don't normally get to do. There's a chance for me to kind of settle personal business, as it were. So a lot of my performances, they tend to take the form of interrogating the notions and context around poetry readings. Poetry readings are a really strange, uninterrogated, awkward kind of social enterprise that people haven't really looked into in the way they have with art performance. So that really is a big thing to keep in mind when I'm kind of covering a few of the poems that I'm going to present to you today. So the first poem, I suppose I should introduce it properly so you understand this. Perhaps you don't have a great depth of experience with poetry readings if you didn't I would perhaps think more of you, but yeah, it's definitely worthwhile me introducing what my first poem is about. I suppose in a huge way, if I think about it, this could be said about, you know, all poems that one writes, but it is about where I'm from and who I am, I suppose. My family, well, my father is from Liverpool. My father and my mother met in Liverpool, but actually his father, my grandfather, was from Sweden. And he left Sweden because Sweden was actually neutral in the Second World War. And this is something people don't know, but actually my grandfather was living in the north of Sweden, and actually he was kind of really well known in that area in the north of Sweden, in this place called Onskoldsvik. And in this place he was kind of like still like a chief, it was still that patriarchal. And he was really well known as a wrestler, actually, a fighter, and it's been passed on to me. So there's two ways to look at what my grandfather did when he came to England. You could look at it one way, really ethical way. You know, maybe he came to England because he thought, look, there's this huge black and white kind of battle for the soul of Europe happening, and he had to be part of it rather than just staying in Sweden, missing out on the whole thing. So you could look at it that way, that he came to England because he felt this conviction that he absolutely had to be part of this exchange, that was something so important to him, that he would leave his family and he would come to Liverpool and he would start again, he would volunteer for the British Army, and that's a heroic thing. There's another way to look at it, one that I feel is kind of part of my genetic inheritance, and that's the fact that perhaps he just loved to fight. I mean, that's something that I feel a little bit, you know, maybe he just wanted to go and kill people. I know that's an awful thing to say, it's only 70 years ago, but I think it probably is the truth. Because when I hear stories from my father about actually what he did during the war, like he burned the cinema down in Alexandria, and he would like deliberately torture people when he captured them and stuff. I mean, who knows if this stuff is true, but it seems like it's true. My father won't really talk about it because my father actually, he didn't have a good relationship with my dad. That's why my name is actually English, because he took his mother's name, he didn't take his father's name, which was Nielsen, which is a bit unfortunate. While Harry Nielsen is a beautiful singer and stuff, Dennis Nielsen was a serial killer, which is really kind of a good thing to be away from. So that's why I've got Fowler, because it's actually my dad's name. So anyway, so he came to Liverpool, I think in like 39, I don't know, as I said, because my father won't tell me, because they did have a huge problem, they had a huge falling out. And my father definitely improved on that kind of generational change between aggressive patriarchal men and men perhaps who are a bit more sensitive in touch with their feelings. That's not to say that my father's that sensitive, he's not really. But I think I've improved upon it, perhaps me being here at the Tate Modern might actually be a signifier of that. But the point is, he came to London initially and then fought in the North Africa campaign and then went back to Liverpool and actually didn't have a job. So post-war didn't have a job, met an English woman, and what he decided to do is become a miner. Now, he'd been wrestling since he was a kid, and in Scandinavia they have a form of wrestling called jacket wrestling. And this jacket wrestling is like Mongolian wrestling or Cornish wrestling or Cumbrian wrestling. It means you take grips on people's jackets. I know a lot of people don't know about wrestling nowadays, but I see wrestling is kind of the oldest sport in the world, and most cultures do it. It's an incredible thing because it's not just actually about competition or sport, or actually the element of wrestling that you might think of like pro wrestling, it's fake and stuff. It's actually a way of kind of corporeally expressing yourself, a way of actually being competitive and creating these male hierarchies. A lot of people have said to me, certainly, when you look at the way that animals fight, the same species, they don't try and kill each other. It's two bears, two dogs, or two rams. When they're fighting each other, they don't try and kill each other, they just try and compete to develop that kind of male hierarchy. Well, that's what wrestling is. And that's why it's so big. It's the national sport of Iran, it's massive in America, connected to the collegiate system, massive in Russia, Chechnya, and all these different places. And it has an ancient tradition. In 1890 in London, 100,000 people went to watch wrestling in this city. It was a huge thing, it was a major deal. So my grandfather coming over with this incredible kind of champion level status, Scandinavian jacket wrestling became a minor, and miners, even though it was incredibly masculine culture, they would never box because they want to hurt their hands. They need to use their hands actually in their industry. They wrestled, and they had a type of wrestling called catch-as-catch-can wrestling. And catch-as-catch-can wrestling is all about submission. Maybe you're not familiar with submission. Basically, it's using your body as an instrument to torture another human body so they give up. It's a way of competing against each other, as I said, like animals, without actually really hurting each other. And my grandfather was really good at it. He was like 6'6", Swedish guy, been wrestling since he was like 1 year of age. He became a really well-known person, but he also was really, really into Protestantism. So he was like involved in the Orange Lodge in Liverpool, and he became quite famous for how he really hurt people. He actually became associated with a specific move that was taught to me because he taught my father, against my father's will. My father taught my brother, and then my father wouldn't teach me because I think he saw me as like the way to move out of that kind of angry, aggressive, patriarchal line of people in my family. My brother did teach me because my brother was a paratrooper. And one of the things that my brother taught me from like the age of 3 was how to wrestle and torture people and submit people. And this move, this weird connection that my grandfather had been famed at breaking people's arms with something called a top wrist lock, my brother taught me all the time, and I'm actually really, really good at it. And what you do essentially, just to explain it quickly before I get into the poem, is when you pin someone down, you're lying across their chest called psychotrops, chest pressure, right? And you force their arm down. Now the human arm can bend really well to try and get up like this. But if you pinch the elbow, if you pull it in, so I'm lying flat across each other like that, if I pull your arm in, you actually don't have the power, you don't actually have a muscle to get out. The top of my wrist would be here, pinning your arm against the floor, and the other hand that I've got would go underneath my bicep and grab my own wrist, and then it would do that.
And what it does, and what you really realise, is that human joints can really bend in one direction. If you turn them in a different direction, they snap. People don't really think about that because you don't spend most of your day thinking about catch pressing or anything like that. It's completely gone out of my consciousness, but I'm telling you, it's true. I've done it to people. I've not broke their arms, but I've definitely done it a lot because I've been doing it since I was 3. So the point is that I really feel like there's this massive legacy about who I am and where I'm from that has to do with this connection directly. It's cultural, but also is about violence and kind of male violence. And this is a huge reason why I write poetry, I think, because I'm really connecting to that notion that perhaps if I use language instead of using physicality, even though really physicality has been part of my life even before I was using language. I was doing it so young, this video of me like getting an opal through with all the E numbers just for doing an armbar to my brother or whatever. Even though it's such an essential, I mean, it's difficult for the people to really relate to actually how that affects my life. Every time I see someone walk, every time I see their balance, their movement, I think about it through wrestling. When I hug people, I think about that underhooks, how I disrupt their balance, how to bring them to the floor, how to make them give up. So your whole life, the way that you mediate these kind of power structures in everyday life is completely affected by this. And so poetry, really, it's a way to kind of get out of that, to use language to do that. And in many ways, that biographical fact has been such a weight over my life, really, to hear this from my father, really, and then not hear any more details because he's so traumatized by, I think, the training that my grandfather made him do. My brother certainly, didn't skip a generation. He really, really hurt me in teaching me as a youth. I used to go to school with red eyes from the strain, the bloodshot eyes would come through from all the capillaries bursting. So it really became a problem. But the main problem is all of that is a lie. In many ways, maybe I tell stories like that because I don't really want to acknowledge why I write poetry. Maybe it's something that's more personal or more intimate or vulnerable, but then obviously I have to be reflexive enough to be able to tell a story about that kind of thing, to be able to be aware of that. And it kind of makes me think maybe I don't write poems or that poem that I'm going to read for you in a minute because of a biographical detail, but maybe it's because if I wanted to do something that I could explain, I would probably do an essay or a speech or something with a direct discourse like most modern novels or a non-fictional book. Maybe actually I only write a poem because it is inexplicable and it actually interrogates the notion of language in the first place. That's possible too. But if that's true, then there'd be no way to introduce it and that would be a waste of everyone's time really. So I'm not sure about that, but anyway, I should read the poem. So in another way, as I said at the start, it's about acknowledging context, like what is the real context of anything you read or anything you present in public or anything you say in a conversation, frankly, because that's, as I said, the first thing I said when I stood up, that is actually what we're doing. We're just having a little conversation. There's not hundreds of us. So in many ways, it is just about 30 people in a room, next to the Thames. I'm not going to read the title. 30 people in a room. The river. Okay, so the second poem that I'm going to read for you, I have to introduce it properly. I will need something from you in the second poem. I suppose I should introduce that in the sense that I can say it's a conversation, but you're still going to feel a little bit put upon and a little bit awkward. So I hate audience participation. I really hate it. I probably hate it more than you hate it. Which reading some of your body language might not be completely true, but I do think that I do hate it as much as you do. Probably the same experiences that you've had. I've had teaching experiences, being taught, pedagogical experiences, I suppose is the term I should use in the context of the Tate Modern. French, German languages that I wish I possessed now, and for a fact I don't possess them because people picked on me when I was at school. That notion of participation against will violates so much what I kind of feel, my essence, what I believe in, that I've actually spent years of my life trying not to just react terribly when someone forces me to participate. It's important to say before I ask you for a tiny favour. I can remember being 7, going to Disneyland and being forced to take pictures with Mickey Mouse, and then my father, again, a middle generation between a murderer and a nice person, which I hope I am, saying, I'll give you £5 if you kick Mickey in the leg. Obviously, what am I going to do? If I've got that energy, he knows I've got energy, I kick Mickey right in the knee as hard as I could, which then I get blamed for. And there's worse ones than that, and it always comes out at Christmas or whatever, doesn't it? Always it's the Gibraltar story or whatever, the monkey stole the Kit Kat. I think Butlins is the worst one. I don't know if you've ever been to Butlins, but that's the worst possible environment for a precocious child with any sort of intellect, because you're forced to get on stage with people who are stupider than you are when they're fully grown, and dance and sing and stuff. So it's a big scar for me, really, to think about audience participation, but nonetheless I'm going to ask you to do that. So I've got 3 poems that are very poetic, and yeah, a lot of people say that poems are finished by the reader, that the text is always kind of in flux, and the only way that you can really understand a poem is by meeting it, like transcendental idealism, by meeting the reality of the language that you're experiencing with your infinite idiosyncratic experiences of language. So you, in a sense, complete it. I'm not sure if that's true, but I've literally tried to do that with these poems. So there is a word removed from these poems. So don't be shy. I just need a poetic animal. Any animal that you think is poetic, just say it out loud.
Rat.
A rat. How wonderful. The poetic animal by this gentleman. A little deeper and she'll lose the rat. At first the surface is just touchable, shadows that might be clouds or birds in flight. She sets her face next to the rat. To get the last of the rat she came from, some slight sense of rat fading as she slips from almost day to almost night, green-grey shading, the first to rat, then more than rat, then to a rat never seen by anyone but her, and that slow drift into darkness set to sever all that she owned and wanted, all the rat she had ever eaten. And now I need a poetic food. That's not a food.
Waffles.
What? Waffles?
Waffles.
Waffles. I thought it was going to be an amazing, a turkey's neck, a wattle. Poetic food, waffles. It's wrong, but it's good. Thank you. I imagine this midnight moment's forest. Something else is the waffle. Besides the clock's loneliness and this blank page where my waffle moves. Through the window I see no waffles. Something more near, though deeper within darkness, is entering the loneliness. Cold, delicately as the dark snow, a waffle's edge touches twig, leaf. 2 eyes serve a moment, but now and again, now and now and now. Sets neat prints into the waffle. Between trees and warily a lane, shadow lags by stump and in hollow of a waffle that is bold to come. Across clearings, a waffle widening, deepening greenness, brilliantly, concentratedly, coming about its own business, till with a sudden sharp, hot stink of waffle, it enters the dark hole of the head. The window starless still, the clock ticks, the waffle is printed. Okay, last one. I need a poetic person, a name. Say your own name. What's wrong with you people? Your friends now, no? I'm not going to hurt you. A name. Who's got a poetic name? There must be a poetic name in the room. Anne.
Anna.
Anna. Thank you. That is a beautiful name. The poetic person. That long, uneven line that was known to us as Anna, standing as patiently as if they were stretched outside a hospital. The crowns of Anna, the sun on archaic faces, grinning as if it were all an August bank holiday lark. Established names on the sunblinds, the farthings and sovereigns, and dark cloth children at play, and the shut-up shop of Anna, beams bleached, named after a queen. Anna, never such innocence, never before or since has changed itself to past without a word. Anna, always leaving the gardens tidy. So, yeah, I mean, as I said, it's important to acknowledge this is not a huge group of people, and all the better for that. I wanted that. I was very happy to hear that. And in that regard, perhaps in poetry especially, there's this massive problem that people pretend that that hierarchical thing I was talking about is truer than it really is, in the notion that it's like theatre or comedy that you pay a ticket to go and see. It's not true of poetry. People are just people's friends or connected to them somehow. Maybe there's like 10% who see it on a website. I'm not saying for the Tate Modern, but you know, poetry. So I thought that it would be nice to share something of mine with you as a little thank you, as a wee gift for you coming. And this is my latest book. And I thought about buying loads of my own book to give you. And I realised I'm quite poor. So I'm going to do something else as a wee gift. Hopefully you won't be afraid as you looked before. Excuse me for one second.
There's more. My dear friend. Adam. Here we go. Has everybody got one? Yeah. I like that. So, nobody gets a chance really to read poetry, and no one really listens when you read your poems to people. So by giving you one and asking you all to read it at the same time, you might actually remember anything that I've ever written, and you can take it home. It's specially shaped. So if you've got a big ego, read really slow, because then when everyone's stopped, you'll be the last one speaking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to count down from 3, and please don't not speak after that, because then I will be the only one, which will be hurtful. So I'm going to go 3, 2, 1. You can read as loud, as quiet as you want. It's a safe space. There will be lots of people reading, so no one will be able to hear you. So you're all right. Okay? And do read the title as well, of course. Everyone ready? 3, 2, 1. That's coming on soon.
We no longer there being straight things in the wall.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Oh no, you don't. That's really great. I feel like we are closer together. As I said at the very start,
it is really personal for me to be here. It is really psychically symbolic to have some time at the Tate Modern where I came when I was so crushed at the start of thinking about doing these things. And so I feel like it's a perfect moment for me to do something which maybe feels a little bit personal and maybe a little bit kind of strange. I think if I was here in a small room, I would think it was strange too, but it's something I really feel like is the right thing to do. I thought about it a lot. Before I even thought about doing poetry or artworks or anything like that, I met someone, and over the last 5 years, very recently we celebrated our anniversary. Someone has been beside me that whole time, even when I hadn't even really thought about poetry and art, and no matter what I'd gone through, that person had been beside me. She had stayed with me. So I feel like while it might seem really out of place to all of you, and to her it might feel a little bit pressured, it is important for me, because it feels so perfect, to ask my girlfriend who's here today a question that is really important to me, and it's a very special thing, I think. So I'm going to ask her a question now. Will you... No, not really. It's not real. It's not real, right? This is the real way. Will you... No, not really. Yeah, she really hates it when I do that bit. But the thing is, I did ask her permission before I did it. And the reason why I didn't do it for real is because we have been together 5 years. It was our anniversary yesterday. And yeah, we just found out, amazingly, she said I could say this, because again, it is about breaking down the normal hierarchical stuff, that she's pregnant. So we're going to have a child, which is really lovely. I suppose I actually should ask her to marry me now, away from the joke. But that would be a bit weird, wouldn't it, to do that now? I would. Good. No, really. The third time, as if that would be true. The third time, can you imagine? Some tall, blonde Eastern European girl crying and coming and hugging me. No, she's not even here. Which is good in a way, because I can say what I like about her. She's not blonde, and she doesn't really like my work, so she won't listen to it either. So that's absolutely fine. I don't have a girlfriend. Of course not. Anyway, joking aside, obviously, as a lot of you know, I'm a gay guy, and my boyfriend is here, so I have a question to ask him. Not really. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that? A big Eastern European guy get up crying? Hug me. That would be amazing. But no, of course I'm joking. She is here, obviously, and 5 years yesterday, people who know me for real know that that's true. So please, just for tolerating me for these 5 years, give her a round of applause. She's not here.